Patience. Appreciate you being here tonight. This is our last program for 2025. This program is brand new, put together by Larry Schlupp. He started this program a while ago, and I think it grew.
Right after COVID.
Right, long time ago. And it has grown and grown and grown and grown, and he has slowly whittled it away to an hour for us tonight. There is also a packet. If you didn't get one, be sure to get that, because that has all the accompanying information that he had to cut out in order to make this just an hour. So, Larry, thank you very much for doing this program for us, and we look forward to hearing it.
Well, I look forward to giving it. I don't know how that's going to go. Now, are you okay, Roger? Because I'm going to speak from this side, probably. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and Jim. Welcome to Divide Country. How many of you live in Divide Country, by the way? Well, there's three, and well, I know. Well, there's two people in here who didn't raise their hand, and they do live in Divide Country. So, this is the first time Divide Country's ever been done this way, and it was quite a bit of work to put together. I get a tremendous amount of information. You're going to see what the pioneers call Divide Country, as opposed to about the only time you hear a divide anymore is on the weather at night. You know, it's going to be warm all day in Douglas County, except on the divide. You know, that's about all you hear. But anyway, tonight we're going to start, and this booklet is got a lot of information about the towns, and I think you'll really enjoy it. It's even got the surnames of the families that were around those towns. Now, it's not necessarily picked up everybody, but it has got certainly the majority. The first slide I'm going to show you has really nothing to do with Divide Country, but it has a lot to do with Colorado. And I was quite shocked. Do you have any idea how many times the county maps of Colorado have been changed? You know, this could be a lotto, and probably you wouldn't get it. But this next slide shows you Colorado, and there's three maps on it. The first one is pre-Colorado, up in your upper left-hand corner, and that shows that we are the square, by the way, the size of the map is the state of Colorado. So out in the west, we were part of the Utah territory. In the north and south, respectively, we were in Nebraska and New Mexico. And what most of us think of is that we were Kansas territory before we became Colorado territory, and that is the place where we live now in Douglas County. But that's what the maps look like from 1860 to 1861. And down below is when, in September of 1861, that's what the map looked like when the original 17 counties were approved by the legislature, the territorial legislature. And the last one, which we have 64 counties, is up in the your upper right-hand corner. And if you look in the middle of that, the high middle, you'll see a little yellow 1. Can you see it from where you are? Well, anyway, that's the last. It changed in 2001 when the voters voted that Boulder would be Boulder County as well. And in between, we had 19 other changes. I'm not going to go through those, obviously. But what's interesting is, so once we became Colorado territory, we had 21 maps that they went through before we got to where we are today with the 21st one. So let's start talking about Divide Country. I want to give you a little background. First of all, we're going to talk about the geology. And this little sketch up here happened. We'll get a little deeper into that sketch, but that's what the top of the Earth, those gray pieces down below are the tectonic plates, and up above it on top is the crust of the Earth. And that changed about 147 million to 60 million years ago. Paleo-man was here in Douglas County about 13,500 years ago. They found remnants in Greeley. They found remnants in Lamb Spring. And they found remnants in Perry Park about 5,500 years ago that Paleo-man had been there. The Native Americans came in from 1500, in the early 1500s to 1890. The Utes came in first. They were driven into Colorado by Ferdinand Cortez, who, in the name of gold for Spanish, drove the Utes out of Mexico and New Mexico. And they are the only Native American tribe recognized as native to Colorado. The Cheyenne and the Arapaho did not come in until the 1820s and left in '64. And I'm talking now about divide country. We also had Comanches and Paiutes down in the south, and a few Apaches and Kiowa to the east. Once the Louisiana Purchase was made in 1803, we had three major explorers that came through there. The middle guy, I should say, is Stephen Long, that came through in 1820, and over to your left, I gotta figure out which hand I'm using here, is Zebulon Pike, who came in 1806 and 1807. He came up the Arkansas, saw Pikes Peak, and from Pikes Peak, when they couldn't climb it, he went on to he was charged with finding the Red River as well. So he went straight west of Pikes Peak. Long actually came through what today is Douglas County as well as El Paso County. The guy that's kind of gray is Fremont. Fremont came in 1843. He came down from the northern part of what today is Douglas County down to Castle Rock, named the rock Pound Cake, and then went straight back east. What really started divide country got triggered by that Manwin gold discovery was made by William Green Russell in June of 1858. And they found gold over in Russellville. And Russellville, if you don't know where it is on the east side of Highway 83, sort of just right, it's a ways north of where 83 and Lorraine intersection is, if you go that direction, and it's over on your right. There's a sign there. It says, I think, Russellville Road, but there's no buildings there at this point. In the lower left-hand corner is a long section of a chunk of the earth, a side cut, and up on top is the crust. The crust is, in Colorado, about 3.1 to 43.5 miles thick, or deep, if you will. And it changes constantly, although we don't recognize it. Underneath that crust is the lithosphere, which came about in the Creation era, and it is kind of a clay-like, somewhat elastic level, and it rides on top of the tectonic plates, which move all around the place. And these things aren't square like you see there, nice and locked in. They're overlapped, they bump into each other. Now, when we go up into what's on your top of the right side, that is known as the Laramide orogeny. Now, anybody know what that is? Do we have any geologists here? I thought we probably wouldn't. All of this stuff actually formed the divide, and it had formed it in the lithosphere and the crust. And those arrows, I don't know, can you see these dashed lines that the arrow's pointing to? Those are tectonic faults that come up through the lithosphere and are seen or can be found by geologists on the crust of the Earth. You can, they actually come up here, and they may go any direction, but they come through the lithosphere and the crust will actually crack. And if you're a geologist, you can find that. And over on the left-hand side, and I'm going to move over there, excuse me. This is Colorado. This little chunk here, this gray, you see this, what looks like an arrowhead? That is divide country. That is this starts west of Palmer Lake on the divide and goes all the way out to just about to Lyman, which is 123 airline miles. Now, it's got all these little arrows in it. But if you look at this thing that looks like a flying grasshopper kind of, that shows the movement of the tectonic plates. They rotate all of the time counterclockwise, and they will tend to slowly move to the east. Okay? Now, remember, these are 120 miles long. Okay? These little arrows shows what's happening with this little gizmo that's rotating out there below us. And we're talking some 80 million years that this thing is going around. It goes counterclockwise, and it is what formed the divide. And these arrows show how they're part of the red arrows here. We got shoved to the east because it was rotating this way, and it was going to the east. Now, the best way to explain this, and by the way, Laramie, Wyoming is not, this goes all the way to Canada. This is a geographic term, Laramide. Now, I'm going to be a musician for a while. This is an old raggedy towel. That looks pretty raggedy, doesn't it? Here's what a Laramide, here is what the earth crust looks like if I could pick it up and hold it, okay? Now, through 80 million years, it started doing this. Started folding back on itself and back on itself and back on itself and back on itself and back on itself. So you wind up with something that looks like, an accordion balance. And then this little sucker spinning around starts pushing that. Well, it starts pushing it to the east. And so what happens, this is now setting like this. And it just slowly pushes it like this. And all of a sudden, you have the Palmer Divide. There are 2 of these in the United States. What do you
I'm just laughing when you told me about the towel earlier, Larry.
Well, that was when I was coming out of the shower. Anyway, so that's how it was, wouldn't you love to have that in slow motion? You know how they take these pictures of flowers blooming and you see every second, is an hour, I'd just like to see how that happened. Because at the same time, the Rockies are going up and down, and then they fall and come back up. But anyway, that's your geology lesson for a while. Now we're going to look at the 59ers coming in. These are the 59ers, and they came in basically 4 ways in terms of trails. If you look at the brown, this is supposed to be brown, it looks more tan, but that is the Platte River route. They started in Omaha, basically, and followed the Platte River, and followed that down into, this is the Trapper Trail, one of the links of the Trapper Trail, and this is the Trapper Trail, the green, but they would come down and drop into the Auraria area where the confluence was, and then they'd spread out from there. Another route was the Missouri River route. That was the least taken, but people would start out on the Missouri River. They'd probably start out at St. Louis. They'd take it all the way through North Dakota into Montana where the Yellowstone comes down, take the Yellowstone and drop down and then hit the Trapper's Trail, which comes down from Wyoming down into the Auraria area. Another one coming from the Missouri River was to come across the Kansas area, and they would come up, hit what is the Smoky Trail on the blue, and there's two routes to the Smoky Trail. It goes two different directions there, and then be into the gold area, or what they thought was the gold area. The last one, the Platte, going up here, the brown one, and the red one were the most traveled. They came in from basically St. Louis. They came in on the Arkansas. They hit the Arkansas, went down and hit the Arkansas, and then they came up and hit the old Santa Fe Trail and took that up to what is today Pueblo, and then they would go up what is known as the Jimmy Camp Trail, or what is known as today, more recently, is the Cherokee Trail. Now, they came in everything. They came in wagons, wheelbarrows, they walked, but there were 100,000 of them. And one of the bigger trains was the Lightning Express, was a wagon train. They could get you from Omaha to Denver in 2 months. So, slow lightning. If you look over to your right, you'll see a map, and the colors don't show up very well. I am sorry. I don't think they well, it didn't just show up to me. You see the blue? You see Norway and Poland and Austria and even Norway. These are where the majority of migrants came from that were in the 52s. And this is down by the number of people that came in. England had the most, then Ireland, then France and Germany, and the Welsh, then Poland and Austria. We even had a few people come in from Norway. And they settled in these states primarily. And this is where the culture came from. This is where they landed. And these are the states. And again, they're in priority order. The 59ers, most of them came in from Iowa, then Indiana, then Kentucky, Kansas, and Nebraska. That was 65% of that. In the blue, that's the 80% of the top 5. Then they came in from Missouri and Illinois and southern Minnesota. Later, they came in a lot from the south. We had quite a few people come in from Kentucky and Tennessee as well. So that's how the families got in. Excuse me, I'm walking in front of the screen there. Now we're going to look and define what the pioneers called the Palmer Divide. And here it is, right here. Here are the states, counties today, and I'll talk about them in how they are today. But as you can see, here is this circle blown up on the other side that was known as Palmer Divide, Palmer Country, by the people who actually live there, or the pioneers. And you will see today's towns up there. You will see some names you may or may not recognize. And when you look at these, and you go down from Sedalia, Castle Rock, down through Larkspur, Greenland, Palmer Lake, and Pring, and down into East and West Houston, which today is the Air Force Academy, by the way. And that is railroad that drove those towns to form. And you had the same thing coming down out of Parker, which was not part of the Divide Country, come down through Franktown, Castlewood Canyon, and went down and came through Franktown, Elizabeth, Elbert, and Eastonville, and then cut down towards Colorado Springs, or at that time, Old Colorado City, which is there today. So that's how they got in. Now, if you'll notice on the top of the screen, it says the land. Most of the pioneers had a motto. And that motto, I'm not sure how it got started, but take care of the land, and the land will take care of you. Unfortunately, today, our developers for subdivisions seem to have the same logo, you know, but they're looking to build on it. Okay, let's look at some of the settling factors. We're going to look at the social and social and the cultures and families on how they came in, where they settled. Here again are the maps: England, Ireland, France, Germany, Wales, Poland, Austria, and Norway. That's where the culture came from. And this is kind of out of line, but they're coming in 59, the Homestead Act, which I'll talk about a little later, were in 1962 opened up 270 million acres of land to fall within the Homestead Act. And if I don't talk about it, I think I will in a future slide. Most of these people settled in areas that had their same culture or language. A lot of these people did not speak English at that time. So you had, if you look at different areas within the divide, you will find that you have English names. Other places you have more German names. And those were places like Lake Gulch, Table Rock, Williamville, Glen Grove, and Spring Valley. Those are not towns, they're communities, why I call them. So what brought them together? What brought them together was survival, human needs that they needed. There were no grocery stores or anything out there, so they did a lot of, they had no transportation that goes outside of the divide, really. They're kind of locked in their own little area. And they traded with each other, they bartered with each other, they helped each other. Some traded lumber for food and that kind of thing. You had lumber, you had various minerals, and you had a lot of food being grown, and they would get together and share those. And so it was basic needs. They would help people build cabins, they would help people, they'd help each other put barns up. And then there were safety in terms of medical issues. All the time on television you see, that all the wives need help with delivery, and you have no doctors at the time, and so it was just one big happy family. And there was a lot of safety too, particularly around the early 60s and 1864. There are actually 4 forts within the Divide Country. We had, in Douglas County, we had up in the north, or up in our area, we had Fort Lincoln, which was over at Huntsville. We had Fort Washington, which was which was on the Quick Ranch. And then we had Fort Lincoln, I said was at Huntsville. And then we had down in the southern, down by Spring Valley, we had the John Arians Fort. And in El Paso, they had the stone, down by Monument, they had the sandstone fort. And the social mixing, that's how Chautauqua actually got started, was in Divide Country, by Divide Country people. Palmer Lake's got the Yule Log, which is the Yule Log Festival, which was a festival that they started. And then the one that I was surprised about, they had potato festivals. They had these roasted potatoes. A couple of towns, Palmer Lake and Monument, were 2 towns that actually held potato festivals where they would, You know, Palmer Lake today has, during Father's Day, has the ice cream. They had baked potatoes. And of course, there was dancing. Oh, yeah, a lot of dancing. And there were a lot of buildings that started going up. This is the Spring Valley School that you see over here on your left. In the middle is the Case Grange and Post Office and Shoemaker and Stage Stop and Hotel. I mean, they were kind of everything at the Grange. And then that is the first church that was built in El Paso County. And please don't use that picture because it can only be shown for educational reasons. It's copyrighted. So that's how they got in. Now, when you go over to the right side of this, you will see that during the 1860s, we actually flew two flags. We flew the Union flag, and way on the east side of Douglas County, and on the west side of Elbert County, we had some Southern sympathizers. Now, I don't know that the Confederate flag actually flew, but we had that going on. And when we became a state in 1876, there was a flag that was made in 75 for Colorado becoming a state. And the United States flag was changed on July 4th, 1877, showing the 38 stars of the states. So that was one of our American flags. Now, I'm going to show you what the divide actually looked like in terms of all of their roads, their towns, their stage stops. And I'm sure you can really easily see everything on that. You know, we got down here it's really hard to look at even from this direction, but I'm trying to find Palmer Lake. Where is Palmer Lake? Anyway, this is a map that was put together by a United States surveyor called Glenn R. Scott in 1999. And it shows where these places were and the roads that were there in between 1859 or 60 and 1880. And you can go online and find this under the Denver Quadrangle 1% by 2%. And that's what it looked like. Now, to make life a little easier for you, I graphically redid that and showed what Douglas County actually looked like to us. These brown lines that you see are the territorial roads. They were established by the first legislature on where they should go. There's actually only two of them. This was the first territorial road coming down through us on the other side of this side of Perry Park and coming down on into the El Paso County area. It was moved then and improved on this second line, which comes down almost on the same pattern that I-25 is there today, or the same location. This one basically is a territorial road that is close to being like 83 today. So those roads existed. These yellow lines that you can see there, I guess I shouldn't use yellow for roads, but can you see yellow out there? These were roads. Some of them were ruts. They're wagon trails. One that is quite well known is that purple one over there. That's the Butterfield stage route, who was all over the Southwest. And that was their route that they came into Denver City on. And these blue areas are the communities that they first stopped at. You know, we had Bear Canyon, settled at, excuse me. We have Lake Gulch, we have Huntsville, Glen Grove, Stone Canyon. Down here we have, this was called basically the people call that Monument. And over on, we had the Pinery down in El Paso. We had Table Rock in El Paso. Spring Valley was in Douglas. Cherry was there. Rock Ridge was in Douglas County. Forest Gulch and Black Bayou. So those were the communities that were originally established. And then when they started getting territorial roads, and when the railroads come in, and we'll talk about that in a minute, you started having places that John Craig built Round Corral, which became Plum, then ultimately became Sedalia. You had New Memphis, and then Castle Rock's about here. New Memphis was looked at as kind of the start of Castle Rock. So you can see these, Russellville, Eastonville, those are towns that developed early and are not there anymore. Pretty interesting. You can see these towns like Houston, Spring, Monument, Larkspur. Well, there's a bunch in here too. You had towns that aren't on the map, that aren't there today. And the red are the sawmills. We had a lot of sawmills around the area. Thank you. We had a lot of sawmills around the area. D.C. Oaks was the first to bring in the sawmill. He had it up in Riley's Hill, up in what is Daniels Park today. That got washed away by the 64 flood. He brought a second one down and put it there. And then Sloan is one of the people that is, he set up where the town right northeast of where the town hall is today in Larkspur. These are all portable, so they just, there was Gomer's sawmill was over by the town of Elbert. Weber's sawmill was up by Running Creek and Elizabeth. And then you had Judd's sawmill, Blakely, Briggs down in the El Paso area. So that's how the towns formed. I put on a map because it's just kind of interesting to me. You see the purple? The purple are ranches that were nicknamed by the people in the divide after the lady of the house. If you look up, Elizabeth Richardson and her husband lived in what they called Pretty Woman, and the Richardson Ranch got called Pretty Woman Ranch because it was a stage stop and she was quite a comely young lady. Down in the middle, you got Clever Woman Ranch. That was Sarah Coberly that was in Huntsville. And if you look at in the early plats, she had a lot of land. She was a very industrious lady. Down here, south of Monument on Monument Creek, is Dirty Woman Ranch. Now, there's a Dirty Woman Ranch Creek. I don't know that woman's name. I don't know if anybody did. She didn't keep her children too clean, and it was probably because she kept some of her livestock inside her house. So, that's what divide country looks like, following the geographic lineage in that light gray. So let's look at the towns or the roads that actually developed and the towns that came out of that. I-25, we had, this is sort of the 105 is sort of the first of the first arterial roads. I-25 didn't come in till 1965, 83, and that's the Palmer Divide, this air dashed line that goes across there for two linemen. And you have Elizabeth and Kiowa and Franktown on 86 that goes on out and hits I-70 that is literally outside the divide country area. It's interesting to note that the highest point in the divide is not Monument Hill, but, oh God, I just had, what's the name? Oh yeah, it's right on there, isn't it? Bald Mountain, excuse me. That's the highest point, 7,887 feet. And the lowest point is at the Air Force Academy now, which is 7,113. So that gives you kind of a perspective of what this circle going around is, the area that we're really kind of talking about, but it's not really circular. It takes this geographic shape. So, now we talked about all the settlers, you know, they built ranges, and they shared work, they shared food, and then here's what we started looking like when we got up into the later 80s. These are kind of 1880 numbers. And this, keep in mind, this is eastern Elbert County, this is southern Douglas County, and this is northern El Paso County. These are the farm crops. You can read, I'm not going to go through each one of these. These are all of the crops that they started and were selling and trading in 1880. Now by then, there were railroads, so some of these crops are shipped out. We'll talk about railroads in a moment. The only grain that was first used was I found alfalfa, but alfalfa really didn't come till later, after 1880. But it's listed in one of the books as one of the that I read, that it's one of the crops, the grain crops. Sorghum, rye, and barley. Wheat and oats came afterwards. Then you had all of the livestock, all the way from dairy cattle, beef cattle, chickens, mules, hogs, and rabbits, goats. I guess you could even call, if you're with Fox Farm, you could even call those livestock, but for a different, not for our consumption. And the livestock products, milk and cream, eggs, manure, which was shipped quite a bit just for fertilizer, meat, and breeding. And this is agricultural, and it comprised 70% of the industry at that time if you started measuring that in dollars. When you get over to mining, that had a lot of other things in it, and that had the miners in it as well as the products. You had the forest harvesting, which also has construction and milling with it. And education at that time was, they had schools, churches, teaching, and ministry. They were classified as education. It's really hard to determine what this stuff is, because they used to take census from 1870 up through 1890 in some places by post offices. And it seemed like anytime there was a building on a road, there was a post office. So, you know, some people got double counted, some people didn't get counted at all. And then when you look at retailing, there is a lot more. When you go through there's a lot more in these places that weren't there anymore. They had a lot of retail stuff in it. But mining was only 10%, and 15% for retailing, hospitality, which was hotels and boarding houses. All of that was 15%. Yeah, I know, it adds up to 95%. You should see one of the algorithm formulas I used to get to the population, because you're doing the same thing with your population. But if you look at the net profit that they had in those days in 1880 dollars, all of the 1,286 people that lived in the divide country, their total was $101,450. That's 1,200 plus people, and the total amount is just over $100,000, you know. Today, in today's 2025, that'd be $3,600,000, a little higher than what you would think by looking at it in thinking in today's dollar value. I've got some of the industries up here. This is Williamsville. This was a creamery, cheese making operation. They also had a grain store there. This is manufacturing. This is Sedalia in 1909. The state with the largest amount of cigars and cigar manufacturing was Colorado. We didn't grow tobacco here, but we had trains. It came in from the south. This is the Greenland Ranch. Sawmilling, I don't know whose sawmill that is. This is merchandising that came out of Sedalia. This is mining, and I think that is over up close to Sedalia, I was told, but I'm not sure about that picture. This is the Madge Quarry at Castle Rock. This is ice harvesting on Monument Lake that they did in Monument. So we get into the late 19th century and the early 20th century. We start road building, planning and road building. You have automobiles starting to come in. You have the railroads and the trains that had came in, and now products were starting to get out of divide country. They were making money, and it really started rising. I'll get to that later. Sorry, walking back and forth. I can't change this thing with the remote. Okay, here are the railroads. First coming in was, if you look, and it's outside the divide, by the way, but the first to come in was the Kansas Pacific. It came in 1870, and Palmer was the one that was a big name there. And you know the story about Perry meeting with Palmer and wanting to help build the railroad to get it to the Pacific. And so what came out of that was the Denver and Rio Grande, which came through the divide country in 1871. That was followed on this side of the divide with the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe in 1887. And then we had the Denver and New Orleans that started and came out of Denver, went through Parker, dropped down and came through Franktown, down through past Russellville, past Elbert, into Eastonville, and down and hit the, when it came through, hit the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad, which came in the 1880s, or 1870s, excuse me. The Denver and New Orleans came in 1882, but then they were bought by another rail company called the Colorado Southern in 1899, and that went all over the place. It had spurs going down to Cripple Creek and what have you. But the economy was booming. You know, you saw potatoes up there. At one time, they were shipping out of divide country 400 carloads of potatoes outside of the divide area and into different states, and a lot of it went east. There were a lot of cattle that were transported by rail, and particularly with refrigeration and ice coming, or ice and refrigeration, it got to Kansas City and then on further east. So that was the plat of rails that came through divide country back in the late 1900s. And we'll get to it, but 1890 was there was a really drought and depression before that. And when 1890 hit, the economy boomed. And that's when they decided, the people said, we ought to just break away from Colorado county lines and form our own divide county instead of divide country. That went really well there, but it never really came true, and it never got to fruition. So that just sort of died and went up in smoke. So let's look at some of the changes. In industries and pulling the trigger, which really caused the growth between 1885 and 1860. We had the Homestead Act in 1862, where you could get 160 acres on a government temporary grant, and it would become yours in whole in 5 years if you lived on the land and improved the land, and it would be yours. Thereafter, for a short period of time, you could buy additional acreage at 25 cents an acre. We had the railroads that really expanded the divide. The Depression from 73 to 79 really stifled the growth, and you'll see that when we start looking at population. The farm and production and technologies drove agriculture as the #1 industry between 1880 and 1960 in the Divide country. The financial growth really grew as well. That's what stimulated we want to be our own county. Yeah, they couldn't drop the R from county, or from country. They had to stay Divide country. But what was happening all along that also, it combined with rail transportation, we started to have major roads coming in. And you recognize those roads that were built that primarily were dirt, gravel, whatever, like Spruce Mountain Road at that time, and Higbee Road, Lake Gulch Road, Tomah Road, Woodman Road. And then cars and automobiles came out in the late 11 teens of the 1900s. And things started really moving. Agriculture growth got hit really hard in 29 and 30 because they had help from the government this was dairy country. And the government started regulating dairy so restrictively that financially the farmers and the dairies themselves could not match or could not meet the regulation specifications, and either closed down or just shut down completely and went to another location. Then we had the regulation of small dairies that, yeah, I said that, between 1930 and 42. Then we had World War II. Economically, it was good for us, but we lost a lot of people. I could not find out how many men and women that died in World War II that were from Divide country. I couldn't get them split between the various counties. But then we had strong farm and ranch technology growth, particularly after World War II, which was actually came off of World War II because of all of the machines that were built for war. And that went through the 60s. And when we got to the 60s, things started to change because age and financials became they were decreasing, financials were. Age was getting older. People who had settled wanted to move to town where the luxuries were. So now you had small farms dropping, you had large farms getting larger, and you can see what was happening. The population was dropping in the rural and starting to go up in the urban areas. Here is, I think, one of the most interesting charts that we've got on the growth and technology of the population over time. We started the Divide country with 1,286 people settling. And we grew that at that time in 10 years in 1890 by about 500 people to 1778. And as you see in the 1900s, we had a drop because of severe drought, and we had still had 68% of the income that was made in the divide came from agriculture or agricultural type products or support stores. So you can watch that go out until we get to 1950, and all of a sudden everything started to change dramatically. And that's when we had a lot of people retiring from the farm and moving to the cities. And if you look at the major cities that we had at that time, which was Castle Rock, Elizabeth, and Monument, they grew by 246% during that point in time. So that is really, really interesting to me. Down at the south side of the divide, in 1955, we had the Air Force Academy that was established. Subdivisions started in the mid to late 50s, and they grew tremendously during the 60s in terms of areas being planned. And you know that story better than I of where they went from there on. It's interesting to note that if you look at the census up through 1960, all of our counties, with the exception of El Paso in the Divide Country, did not have any urban areas because you had to have a certain number of people. I think the number was, don't quote me, but I think it was like 2,500 people. But I think that's an extremely interesting chart when you look at what happened and what happened during those times, like the Great Depression. People just, severe drought came at the same time. You know, they really, you really had to be a strong person to live in the Divide area during the late 1800s through the 50s. Now, we're going to look at the growth in technology. The top line, the government support through those 30 years, first we had the Civilian Conservation Corps, which really did help. We had the Soil Conservation Act. The REA was established. We had federal crop insurance come in. Extension agents were introduced. We started a federal flexible price supports. We had soil banking. God, I remember that pretty well. And we had poultry inspections. And if you take it on out to 1965, you'll find out that you had another white meat other than chicken. It was pork. That was their advertising. The modernization that happened on the farm was quite interesting to me. Very interesting. The first thing that really came in, and it was in the 30s, was a three-bottom gang plow. And that was the first introduction. The second one that came in the late 30s, I think it was 35 and 37, was the milking machine. And since this was dairy country, that was a big deal. This guy over here has a hand pump and hoses that go to two different cows, and he's like a bass drummer. He's playing the drum with his foot. He's pumping air. He's creating the vacuum. Then they went to the actual vacuum and the electric vacuum, and really established what's close to the milking machine today. They call that the rollator. I'm not sure how it got its name. And things were happening in other places too. We started using the heavy chemical fertilizers starting in the almost the mid 40s and through the 50s. We had our artificial insemination of dairy cattle, and it started with beef cattle and horses shortly thereafter. We had, acreage for the acreage for crops did drop because the farms were getting bigger and they were going either to dairy or to cattle. And 50% of the farms had electrical pumped water, heaters, and washing machines. Great, we're going. I've never heard of this. Which was one of the first electric What did they say on there? Yeah, Huber. I guess that's a man's name. That was supposed to be one of the first electrical water heaters. And then you had one of the first washing machine was the Bendix. Now, I like John Deere products, and they started coming out. They started coming out in the 40s and the 50s, and this one that is second to the end there is a John Deere B. That was the old John Deere that was well known. I've ridden on one of those a lot. They're the ones with 2 cylinders. Pop, 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 you know. And then in 1960 through 63, in 60, John Deere came out with the 4010. And that was the first one that, the John Deere B, by the way, had a 17 horse motor. And the 4020 had an 80 horse motor, but still 2-wheel drive, but full hydraulics. And I spent a lot of time on one of those too. So here's the interesting part. Back in 1930, 13% of the farms had electricity, and you can see that one farmer could feed 9.8 people. When we get to 1940, 33% of the farmers had electricity, and a farmer could feed 10.7 people. Then you slip in, as some of the big improvements came in terms of modernization, into the 50s, you've got 50% of the farms had electricity, and one farmer could feed 15.5 people. And then when you got to the 60s, that went up to 25.9 people, and all the farms had electricity. Anybody remember when farms didn't have electricity? Yeah, I remember that too, Bill. We didn't have telephone either. Okay, now you got the booklet. Now I'm showing you one of the towns. This was Eastonville. This, by the way, of all the towns disappeared, was the largest town in the Divide country that disappeared. It had a population of 350 initially and grew up to 500 before it disappeared when the Colorado and Southern shut down. And all you see out there today, I guess, is foundations. I haven't been out there for a long time, but I guess that's what you see. But look at all the town composition is just loaded with retail and various churches and schools, creamery, and the area ranches, the KKK ranch, and the early industry crops that they raised in that particular area. The first settler was the McConnells, and in fact, Eastonville was originally called McConnellsville. And the railroads that came through was the Denver and New Orleans, or the Colorado Southern. Interestingly enough, I don't know if the book has the surnames of the people that lived in the Eastonville area or not. It does? Okay. Yeah, I didn't put it on this particular slide, but this was really a bear of a project to put together. You know, we haven't talked a lot about the towns and the families. You can see the major towns, or the major small towns, in the booklet. And here are all of the references. You'll also find those in the booklet if you want to look at them, if you're interested in something. I have 3 people that I want to acknowledge tonight. One is Bill Noe. Bill helped me amazingly with a lot of information and a lot of, we throw a lot of things at each other and try to figure them out. He did a superb job. Bev did a very great job in editing these for spellings and rightness, correctness, and so on and so forth. Joe Martell out is the president of Elbert County Historical Society. he was very, very helpful as well. And down in El Paso County, Susan Koch wrote a book called My Blood is in the Land, and it does the same kind of analysis for the the south side of the watershed from the divide. But those were great. Those were really great. So here's what's in your book. It's got a preface to it. It's got the bibliographies and links in it. Here are the towns that are in there in Douglas County, Elbert County, El Paso, and then we have something that that Bill and Bev got me to put it in, was the first subdivisions. First subdivision in Douglas County that appeared on the maps when I put subdivisions together was Green Acres. You know, it's up by Highlands Ranch, or northeast of Highlands Ranch. That was technically the only one, but this one I kind of laughed at. It was a Douglas El Paso subdivision. It was named the Park Lake, or the Palmer Lake Park. The name came from El Paso, but the park was in Douglas County. And it was a subdivision of artists. And if you know where, it was right north of Hanks Canyon or adjacent to Hanks Canyon, back in that area? Yeah. If you don't know where Hanks Canyon is, you come out of Palmer Lake and you go through the S curve, and as you come out, look to your left. But yeah, so that is the divide country. If we went through the various towns and talked about the people, would be here another hour and a half. But so.
That's amazing.
Well done, Larry.
I've been telling Larry he has a book here, a published book. By the time he finishes this.
It's a book that, you know, it's kind of like the old towns. Probably didn't happen. You know, they're gone now.